Good morning. On behalf of the Texas Tribune, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2020 Texas Tribune Festival and to the first of our CityTalk podcasts in partnership with the LBJ Urban Lab and the Kinder Institute for Urban Research. This is Placemaking as Activism, and we'll be here for 30 minutes. I'm your host, Allison Arieff, Senior Editor of City Metric, part of the New Statesman, and I'm very excited to introduce our amazing speakers today. First is Tamika Butler, who is founder and principal of Tamika L. Butler Consulting. She previously served as Director of Equity and Inclusion for Tool Design and as Executive Director of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, a nonprofit that addresses racial and social equity by building parks across Greater Los Angeles. Chaz Moore is the founder of the Austin Justice Coalition, a nonprofit organization aimed at demanding criminal justice reform and building community at the local, state, and national levels. He champions efforts that meet community needs, such as feeding the hungry, fundraisers for those who've been brutalized by the police, and pioneering programs for Black youth, men, and women. And finally, Taneshia Laird, who is the president and CEO of Newark Symphony Hall, a historic performing arts center in Newark, New Jersey. Previously, Taneshia served as Executive Director of the Arts Council of Princeton and as Director of Economic Development for the City of Trenton. Thank you all so much for being here. So our panel is called Placemaking as Activism. I personally find placemaking to be a really vague term. I think that there's no sort of complete definition of what that really means. I'd love to hear from each of you what it means to you, and if you can give an example of placemaking that's sort of a place that really works for you, and how did placemaking what is it, and what space epitomizes it for you? And Tamika, I'll start with you.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. First of all, really excited to be part of the festival and part of this amazing panel. I am on the West Coast, and so it is a little earlier here. So hopefully, starting with me still gets you a coherent answer. When I think of placemaking, I think of also space taking and an ability to stay in space. I think all of those things have to be encompassed in placemaking. We have to be able to make a place where folks can show up with dignity as their full selves. But, as I said on occupied Tongva land, I also want to realize that sometimes placemaking displaces other people. And so there has to be room for space taking and staying in place. And when I think of spaces that make me feel like it is a place, my background is in bike advocacy. And so I think about some of the bike paths or rides I've been on, and the difference between just a path and a place is when I feel like the path I'm on is where I'm supposed to be, not just the thing that's taking me somewhere, right? And so when it feels like a place, when there's local art, when there's wildlife, when there's vegetation, where there are community members, just hanging out, walking, enjoying it, when it really feels like that is the place, it's not just the thing I'm getting through.
Great. Taneshia.
Thank you. I also want to say how pleased I am to be included in this conversation. I echo a lot of the things that Tamika said. I think there's a real difference between creating just open space and creating a place that people feel like they belong. And so I think good placemaking does that. I think it makes you feel included. And that there are amenities around that gives you a sense of comfort. And for me, that's what it is. I'm not really a big fan of this idea of placemaking, though, I will like to say. And of course, we are all on occupied land. I'm on occupied Lenape land. And so I like the idea of more placekeeping, making people feel that they are not in danger of being displaced, and that things that are being brought in for their enjoyment and not to attract outsiders. So that's my view.
Great. And Chaz, how about you?
Yeah, and now I have to follow these two amazing answers from these two amazing Black women. I think for me it's a little bit of both. Especially in the work that I do in policy work and advocacy work. I think a lot of times decisions are being made primarily regarding institutions that affect Black people, people of color, people in the margins the most. So I think it's really important that we are a part of those conversations and that our voices are heard. But it's also, like um, once that space is made, right? How can I convince city structures, city governments, the city powers that be, that throughout these processes, from now moving forward, we need to always make sure that we have the voices of those people that have been, harmed the most, the people that are most affected. I'm at the center of these conversations, right? Like, you can't talk about violence prevention without talking to and learning from people that have been mostly impacted by violence. The same thing with homelessness or drug abuse or substance abuse. We have to make sure we are centering the voices of people that are closest to the problems, because as always, the closest to the solution. So yes, carving out that space, but also making sure that that space is there outside of any advocacy work, just making sure it's part of the structure, because that's the only way things really work.
Mhm. No, that's great. And I'm wondering if you could all speak to what you just brought up, Chaz, about sort of centering it around the people. And I'm wondering if you could all speak to the ways that have been successful for you in making that happen. I think that we're at a really interesting time for community and public engagement because we have to do so much of it online. I think it's been an interesting surprise how sort of many cities have found that that sort of engagement has really grown as more people are able to access it. And I'm wondering if you could all speak to ways that have been effective in making the community part of this process. And Taneshia, let's start with you, because I feel that at least my experience in San Francisco, where pretty much people just argue about everything all the time whenever they're brought together. I'm always interested to hear about ways in engaging the public and the community in ways that don't just result in people coming to say that they don't like something. For example, what has been effective for you as you do your work?
Thank you. So the fact is, the pandemics, plural, have brought us together as a community. At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we created something at Newark Symphony Hall called Embrace Newark, which was providing food and personal protective equipment. But we knew it had to go further than that because you can't live by, the Bible says man cannot live by bread alone. And so I think that I know that we needed to bring culture into the conversation. And so, under the direction of a creative director by the name of Jasmine Mans, we brought together a cohort of 10 local artists, multidisciplined artists, visual, um, performing, poet, literary, and they created something really amazing called Symphony of Survival. And the intent and the only direction that they were given initially was to let us in on how you are documenting your self isolation experience. But then the murder of George Floyd happened, and Black Lives Matter protests started happening around the world, including in the city of Newark, New Jersey, where we're located. And so the messaging and the narrative changed. And so putting this archive together, which was online, we made a decision to actually fill our windows. We are historic buildings, so our first floor is probably about 20 feet high, and the windows are at least 10 feet high. And we took 14 images of the archive, which you can see at symphonyofsurvival.com. You can see the actual images, but we put those images in the windows. So we put messages like Black Lives Matter in the windows. We put a poem by a local poet that's part of the cohort by, her name is Kay Desiree, and her poem, she specializes in doing haiku, was "Don't Let Me Die in Custody, on film, in cuffs, on Front Street." And so the way that people are engaging is actually multimodal. They can engage online, but they could also engage by walking literally down the street
Mhm.
and seeing this art. And I think that that was our way of putting public art on our historic building, 95-year-old building, but also creating a sense of place for the people there. But it was through, uh, I would say, disagreement with how Black people are being treated in the country.
And just to follow up a little bit on that, as you sort of move forward with your project, how are you involving people in the decisions around the Newark Symphony Hall? In terms of like, how
So,
are you bringing them together to help placekeeping? I guess is how you put it.
So we have the community have been involved already in many ways. I mean, obviously before the essentially shutdown, we had people that were coming in, whether through performances, whether through our Children's Performing Arts Academy, which once again we had to make it virtual. But because we
Mhm.
were also handing out food every morning, they were coming, picking out food, picking up food, engaging, having conversation, sharing their feelings. They share their feelings in public, they share their feelings online. We're pretty, we're the largest city in New Jersey, but we're still only 300,000 people. So we're pretty
Mhm.
small in comparison to
Mhm.
most large cities across the country. And so, again, it's both online as well as in that very limited way, in person contact that has been happening every
Mhm.
morning.
Great. Chaz, I know that you are working with this group, Reimagining Public Safety, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that work here.
Yeah, so we just did a another thing here in Austin around policing. We were able to um, I'm just gonna say defund because I know what the actual definition of that word means, right? It means to either take money or seize money from going into something.
Mhm.
And the political pundits don't want to use that word because politics, but
Right.
we were able to reallocate up to $150 million from the police department as we move into this new era in public safety where we have to invest in community and alternatives to policing because
Mhm.
um, they're literally like examples almost daily after George Floyd of just grotesque and before. I don't want to definitely don't want to skip that. So people rallied. We came together virtually, of course, through Zoom
Mhm.
and WebEx and all the things. And the community came out in abundance and said that we want at least $100 million, up to $230 million removed from the police department's budget, so we can get creative in how we approach crisis, right? Because we know when we call 911 and we get the people in the uniform and the badge, we do not get the outcomes that we desire. So right now, after the budget vote on June 11th or 12th, the city has started this reimagined public safety task force, which is something we love in Austin. We have a task force for everything, but this task force is tasked with um, literally creating these alternatives to public safety. Right? If we want this mental health first response crisis team that doesn't involve police, we have the opportunity to do that. If we want trauma centers and the violence and harm reduction centers, we have the opportunity to do that. So for the next 6 months, me along with a handful of other community organizers and individuals are meeting with the city and city heads to talk about what this actually looks like.
Mhm.
And so the way the budget was set up, we had about 21 million dollars in immediate cuts from not having cadet classes for 2021, and some other things. So we have $21 million immediately available to do whatever. $80 million was in this bucket of decoupling, right? So like the forensics lab will no longer be under APD. A lot of departments that does not need to be under police department control are now going to be their own independent thing. And then the city is taking this like they have this separate bucket of $47 million in which we really want to reimagine public safety. So like we have that money to play with as we hopefully come up with these things that will either be examples of the thing that comes to mind is the Cahoots program in Colorado, where they have a fairly decent mental health first response. Or, I think the more exciting thing is that we actually get to create something new and see if this works and go and just really be creative, because we have to understand that so much of the things that we try to do under this white supremacist capitalistic society is very it just doesn't work, right? And I think we have to allow our communities of color specifically to go back and try things that are indigenous to us, right? If we all do our history, we know that indigenous folks and people of color have ways and techniques that have worked for eons. They're just never talked about because, again, racism. But yeah, I'm excited to be a part of something new. I'm excited to be a part of something that is realizing that the things we have in place just do not work. And we have to, we must, if we really care about Black people and the quality of life of people in this country, we have to try something uniquely different outside of policing.
That's terrific. It occurs to me as I'm listening to you, it feels like Austin is making some more rapid progress on this than a lot of other cities where there's maybe a bit more hand wringing. Can you point to anything that has helped that along? Is it the community? Is it leadership? Is it like what things have kind of helped this kind of get off its feet so much quicker than in a lot of other places?
I think it's a few things. Definitely the community. Austin is far from perfect, and this is one of the whitest places on earth. But I do think it's a uniqueness in the white community here that we actually believe that or they actually believe that this is the most progressive city in the South. And then they have people like me saying, well, not quite. So they keep fighting to try to live up to this liberal progressive nickname that they've given themselves, right? And I'm here to not only me, but the Black community and Black organizers and advocates are here to hold them accountable to that. I do also think it's part of the leadership, right? We have a uniquely democratic, progressive city council and mayor, so that always tends to work. But I think when it comes to policing, we have to go back to 2017 when we, rallied against the police union contract, and we actually won, right? Still up until this day, that was the first moment in the country where city council unanimously, not even unanimously, just told police union no. And in that moment, it was a paradigm shift. There was a power shift to show, what happens when people show up and when people do question authority, in terms of the police. So, I think since 2017 and the police union contract, and that being something that hasn't happened or doesn't happen quite often, if ever, it became easier for the city council and for the community to really lean in and say, why are we putting so much money into the police? Why are we trusting them to do everything, right? And it just, I think that moment became like a new precedent for how we do things around police and really just big decision making in general in the city. So I think it's a little bit of everything.
Oh, okay, great. Tamika, if you could speak a bit about effective ways that you found to best engage the public in placemaking.
Yeah, I think one, just going back to what Taneshia said, it's placekeeping, right? And I think that has to be a central part of what we're thinking about. I was part of a conversation yesterday with some folks from a city and some folks, some community advocates in the space, and there was kind of this question: how do we effectively engage people? During COVID, how do we effectively engage people when the default is to show up and complain, right? Like something you spoke to. And something that I really appreciated hearing from this advocate is, instead of focusing on what people are showing up and doing, we have to focus on why they're doing it, right? And I think you've heard some of that as Black folks have been talking about the uprising that's happening. Folks want to police how we talk, our tone. If we're doing what they want to describe as looting, they want to attribute things to our pain and to the actions we take. And as Black folks, we are constantly told, if you just did it differently, we could hear it. And I think part of engaging folks effectively is getting out of that mindset, which is based in white supremacy, that if there was just a different way to do it, because the reality is that when certain people show up at a community meeting yelling, it may be annoying, and folks might be like, oh, NIMBYs, oh, this affluent homeowners association, but those folks get what they want, right? When other communities show up upset about something, yelling and protesting, it is violent, it is aggressive. And so instead of focusing on what people are doing, we have to start thinking about why they are doing it. What is bringing people to the point that when they come to this meeting, where oftentimes, especially in my profession of planning or placemaking, whatever you want to call it, urbanism, when folks show up to a meeting and they feel like the community is just yelling, and they're like, well, but I'm your savior. I'm here to fix it. I'm here to fix it. I'm here to give you the bike lane. I'm here to build the community center. I'm here to build the housing. Like, why aren't you happy? And folks are just so disappointed with what they are experiencing. They're not hearing what folks are saying. Why are you showing up now? Who is this for? You're not actually showing up to ask me my opinion. You're showing up to tell me what you think should happen and why you think it should happen. And so first, I think there has to be this really urgent shift and focusing on how people are doing something and understanding why they are doing something. And then when you engage folks, you have to be ready to atone. You have to be ready to be transparent. And I think sometimes the mistakes folks make, particularly folks who are intimidated in those spaces, right? As Black folks, as a Black queer, gender queer woman, I'm used to showing up in spaces all the time and looking around and not seeing anybody who looks like me. And I have to figure out how to move and operate in that space literally for my survival. Whereas, you throw a white planner into a community meeting and they feel like they're the only white person at the barbecue and they're nervous. And we all have to figure out that if we want to effectively communicate, we have to be in these spaces. We have to be in spaces that we might not usually go to. And we have to do it with open, honesty and transparency, atonement, owning up for the things that have gone wrong, the project that didn't work, the way we didn't do something right. And I think sometimes those really good, well-meaning folks who want to do good work mistake that to mean that effective engagement means always saying yes and just trying to give people whatever they want. And the reality is, as Black folks, as folks of color, as queer folks, as folks with disabilities, any group that's been oppressed, right? We're not asking you to always say yes. We're asking you to respect us as people, to tell us the truth, to be transparent, and to tell us what's actually happening and why, and then to listen to us deeply when we offer that's not what we want, right? And I think that is really hard. I got really upset yesterday because I saw a planner tweet something about defunding the police, defunding the police, taking their cruiser, laying that person off and building a speed hump. And for me, I was like, if you think a speed hump is going to save my life, that's not it. And so while I admire what you're doing, you have to be open. You have to want to listen. And then when we talk about that, we'll realize that when everybody freaked out yesterday because Zoom was down, that's something what about the folks who never have Zoom? What about the folks who never have good enough internet to be there? So I think you're right. I think in this space, I've done a number of walk audits by Zoom, and it was great how many more people showed up and how accessible it was for folks. I've watched police commission hearings here in Los Angeles or city council meetings where we were told you have to show up downtown at this time, go through the detector, do all of this. And all of a sudden they figured out how to do it on video. So I think we have to own that some of the things we're doing are working, but for some folks, it's never been working, and we have to be open to listening to that and changing.
Yeah, I remember reading about a series of transportation planning meetings that people were holding on city buses, which I thought was great. And also, some supervisors who hold a weekly meeting in a different small business each week. Chaz, have you heard of more innovative ways of outreach like that to kind of meet people where they are?
Not not really. City council tried to have a budget meeting in person. Well, they were required to have one in person due to state law, but it was like the Apple commercial from '84, right, where everybody's looking at the screen. Like city council wasn't even there. It was just like we're watching them remotely, and people were giving testimony. But I think what has been working, despite the pandemics, people in the Black and Brown and Indigenous communities have just done what we always done. We're still door to door, right? We're still doing one pages to the door. We're still, calling people, and those things are working, right? Because like Tamika said, like the fact that we're on our Macs, whatever computer we're on, with our headphones, and this is very much a privilege that a lot of people in the communities that we serve or that we're connected to don't have. So what has worked again is the thing that has always worked before, which is just getting as close to the people as possible and meeting them where they are. And I agree with Tamika. Like yesterday when Zoom blew out, it was not a lot of people that looked like me that was freaking out, right? Because we already knew that this is a privilege, right? Like I'm very privileged to sit here with my $200 ring light and my HD webcam, right? But for the people that I'm connecting to, like they never use this, which is why I have to put on my mask and go to the neighborhoods and communities where they are, because that's how I know for sure I can reach them. I think it's part of my job to take the information that we can as an organization and disseminate that back to them, and then let them tell us what they want and how we can get them engaged and things of that nature. So, I was raised by my grandmother, so she always tell me, if this doesn't work, just do what has always worked. And in this case, that's just getting, that's just boots to the ground.
Can I just make a point though? That
course,
no matter the mode, I want to go back to something that Tamika said because it was really important. No matter the mode, we have to be careful about not prescribing solution and without really listening to what the community wants. So I don't care if you're doing it by Zoom. I don't care if you're doing it with a public meeting that's in person. What I know, in your intro of me, you read that I was a city official. And that was one of the concerns that I had, as a city official. Oftentimes we did these public meetings because we were required to do the public meetings, but internally we already knew it was sort of, in a sense, decided what the solution was. And we using that public meeting instead of to get information of what the community wants, to convince them that what we decided already is what they wanted. And that's what we should not be doing. Right. And that's in this role, what I endeavor every day to not do, not say, okay, I've decided this is how we're going to do it. And we're just going to focus on convincing the community that this is the right solution.
I want to bring up something about that just because I'll be speaking with this group later today, but there's a program here at UC Berkeley that's basically, it's a master's degree in real estate development. So I'll be speaking with some students today who are studying to be developers. So to your point, how do we kind of navigate this idea that people study, they gain expertise in something which is different than someone else's expertise? I think one of the greatest challenges, as you've all alluded to, is how do you sort of respect everyone's different sort of expertise in these processes? Is there a place for, I guess my question is, collective decision making, collective place keeping is difficult. What advice would you have for these students who are, as you've all pointed out, sort of well-intentioned, want to do sort of sustainable, equitable development, but are studying at a advanced degree level to do that, which is probably giving them, in some ways, more of the expertise that's not helpful in many of these contexts. What advice do you have for those students? Tamika, I'll start with you.
I mean, for me, when I think about expertise, I always think, I don't want to tell anybody who is privileged, and who cares enough to seek further education that what they're doing is wrong, right? I think I was raised by Black women, who didn't go to college, who always stressed that they wanted me to get an education. And so I did. And so what I tell those folks is, you have to figure out ways to supplement your education if your education isn't giving you everything you want. And then we also have to think about who we consider experts. You don't just need a fancy degree from a fancy place to be an expert. And so that's what I would say. Sometimes the expert is the dude who's sitting on his stoop every day, the grandmother who's looking at her window and knows everybody. And so I would just encourage folks to realize that sometimes we only give expertise to people with degrees, but our educational institutions have been built on keeping certain people out. And so as folks in communities, we've always been willing to listen to other folks and appreciate their expertise. We just need that same respect back. And that means listen to us, but it also means pay people.
Yeah. We only have 2 more minutes, but Taneshia, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to talk about how important culture is to all of this. I love that we had a Newark Symphony Hall building on this panel, because I think that often gets left out of this conversation. In about 30 seconds, can you talk about why that's important to the conversation that we're having today?
At the risk of repeating myself, because I think I said this, is that culture, I think, is important for that sense of community. And I believe in the same way we talked about what makes a great place, that feeling of comfort and belonging. So culture, I think, brings that to the table in a way that, in my view, very few other, I don't even want to call it amenities, but very few other things can. So it's for comfort, and it's for that sense of community. So thank you.
Sure. Also, I think when you and I spoke yesterday, we talked about this idea that there's often a kind of toolkit for making spaces effective. Like, we'll put in some benches, we'll build this building. Chaz, your sort of final remarks. It seems to me, certainly in this conversation, it's not so much the physical manifestation of a place, but rather the programming and the people. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit as you're kind of rethinking how best to use these funds and to create safer places. What's kind of top of mind for you?
I just think it has to be community centered, right? I think this all boils down to what Tamika has been saying, and really, everybody. Let's listen to the people that we've mistreated for so long in this country. Let's let them give us the solutions that they want, and let's actually work and build those things, right? Let's not tell them that this is the thing you need, that this is the thing that's going to work. Let's actually try for a change to hear the communities that we push to the margins. And really, if we can end on a high note, and something that I've learned as a cisgender heterosexual male is that we really must, as we're working to tear down these systems of white supremacy and racism, we also have to uproot them from ourselves, right? It's no good if I uproot white supremacy and racism and then I'm still bringing white male patriarchy with me to this new society, to this new world. We have to really listen to Black women and queer folks, because I think they're the only ones that can save us. And I'm not saying all the labor is to them, but for centuries we've just not listened to them, and they've always had the answers, right? And I'm learning more about that in the work that I'm doing, because I know a lot of Black men, cisgender Black men, are out here, fighting the fight, but then they're not fighting the fight internally, which is just as harmful, in my opinion. So, I think we just need to listen to the folks that we've been harming for so long, because we have those answers.
Well, I think that that's an incredible place for us to come to the end of our time. I want to thank all of you, Taneshia, Tamika, and Chaz, for this today. It's been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.